And I'd like to call on our last speaker for tonight, which is Ron. Ron has been a mentor to me and many of us who have been involved in the whole water debate for some time. Ron has more knowledge of the irrigation system and also of the politics of water than anyone else that I've met. And he carries that through with passion, and he is very determined to see that this lunacy stop. So welcome Ron Pike to the podium.
Chairman Paul, Senator Madigan, ladies and gentlemen, to be back in Griffith and the MIA is to me to be back home. It's to walk on the soil and the land that made me what I am. It's to be amongst people that I respect hugely because of the enterprise, the adaptive capacity and the entrepreneurial spirit that you have shown through several generations. We are here tonight because most of you people believe that the people you elected to government have made a big mistake. They have let you down. They have destroyed your capacity to be the productive people you are. To understand how that happened, we need to understand history. It's not working. 200 years ago this year, the explorer John Oxley and his botanist Cunningham stood on the Binya Hills. And as they looked over the landscape below, Cunningham wrote in his diary, "I believe I am the first white man to look across this desolate landscape. I believe I will be the last because it is unsuitable for habitation." A few years later in 1829, Sturt and his party were near Darlington Point. Everyone thinks that Sturt was in a boat at that stage. It's a pity our politicians didn't read a little bit more history. They actually weren't. They didn't make the boat until they got down to Hay. When Sturt looked to the north, he wrote in his diary, "The river is decoying us into a drier and drier desert. As I look to the north and the north and the west, I see a desolate, treeless plain." Those two observant... Those two observant explorers wouldn't believe what has happened in the 200 years since. In the 200 years since, you people, your families, my family, have developed a food bowl of which the world is in envy and of which you can be proud. And I just want to show, when we did this, they are man-made wetlands. Prior to the advent of water conservation and irrigation, there were very few wetlands in the Murray-Darling Basin. The ones that were there were ephemeral. They spent more time bone dry than they did hydrated. The only way they got water was when floods went over the top of the bank. They filled up, they're all shallow, they're about 2 metres. When the floods stopped, within 2 years they were dry. And all the aquatic life died. That's what happened. This is what happened when we put water onto those treeless plains. They came to life. The uninhabitable became unimaginably productive. When we do this, what we do is create jobs. We create tax-paying jobs as opposed to taxpayer-funded jobs. Isn't that what we should be doing? When we put water onto the plains of the Riverina, some of the towns that had been there before and grew in the wool boom were already starting to die. The advent of extra water saw towns like Deniliquin and Warcool and Finley and all the other towns started to grow. Those towns kept growing until 3 years ago. What happened 3 years ago? Deniliquin has lost 1,200 people. The town of Warcool, the school has gone from 120 children to 13. I won't go on with other examples, but that's what's happened. When we put water on the dry plains, we make man-made wetlands. That wetland there was stocked with native fish. I know because I built it. That's what irrigation development does. As a result of this plan, that wetland is now dry. The fish are gone, it's dry. That's Menindee Lakes. Why do you think the pelicans are there? Pelicans ain't stupid, I tell you. They're there because there's a whole chain of aquatic life, including fish. That is a man-made wetland. It's one of the biggest man-made wetlands in Australia. And yet, the media, the environmentalists, conned the politicians into believing that we destroyed the wetlands. In actual fact, we created the wetlands. They are both wetlands. See that rice paddy there? A few years ago, the University of Canberra came to the Riverina for 3 years and they surveyed rice paddies. You can look the report up on the internet. They came to the conclusion that the rice paddies of the Riverina were the biggest frog breeding area in Australia. They further came to the conclusion that over 5,000 million frogs breed in the rice paddies of the Riverina every year. Now, anyone who's grown rice, or anyone who has been on a rice farm, knows that. Rice paddies became a moving mass of aquatic life. Why do you think the wading birds all come to the rice paddies? Where do you think the so-called threatened bullbird or the bittern spends its breeding cycle? It breeds in rice paddies. It doesn't go and breed in the so-called natural wetlands because they're not reliable. Every year the bittern knows it can lay its eggs, make its nest, lay its eggs, raise its chicks in the rice paddies, and that's what it does. There were numerous lies that led to the Murray-Darling Basin plan. The rivers were dying. I'm just going to go through these quickly because it's been a long night. They weren't, and I'll demonstrate why. That over-extraction was leaving our rivers dry. We have always managed our water resources with the flexibility that we used more water when it was available and less when it wasn't, and that's been the case for 90 years. It changed a couple of years ago. As a result of dam building, we have less floods. I haven't put it up here, but if you go on the internet and Google my name, you will see a chart that demonstrates that in recorded history before we built the dams on the Murrumbidgee, the Murray and the Lachlan, we had far less floods than since. In other words, we have more floods. And what's this plan trying to do? It's trying to say, oh, we're going to try and create a flood. Now, they can't do it anyway, but we've got more floods. The reason for that is quite simple, but we cannot dispute the fact that we've had more floods since we built the dams than before. South Australia and Adelaide are short of water. That is absolute nonsense. The multi-state agreement that was put in place to look after Adelaide and South Australia was put in place in 1915. It's been amended 3 times, every time to the advantage of South Australia. Currently it says that South Australia gets 1,850,000 megalitres of water every year, except in exceptional circumstances. How many years have the exceptional circumstances been instigated? How many? Anyone? Actual 2. So in 50 years, Adelaide has always got more water than, South Australia, more water than it needed. They've never been short of water, and to say that they are is just a straight out lie. So what did I must excuse my friend here, Mr. Madigan, and a couple of other very good friends of mine who happen to sit in the Senate with Mr. Madigan, because they weren't responsible for this. How did the Commonwealth react? It reacted by breaking its own constitution. The Constitution of Australia says, Section 100, the Commonwealth shall not, by any law or regulation of trade or commerce, abridge the right of a state or of the residents therein, that's you people, to the reasonable use of the waters of the rivers for conservation and irrigation. The Murray-Darling Basin Plan and the Act that spawns it is contrary to the Constitution, and it should be thrown out tomorrow. End of story. Now we'll have a look at some of the other lies. They said that we were running the system dry. That's the Murray River in January 1914, near Echuca. Does that look like a healthy river to you? Fair dinkum. That, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly the same spot at the height of the drought. In which one of those 2 photos is the river dying? That's further down near Renmark. Now what that tells us, the mighty Murray in 1914-15 was bone dry for nearly 2 years. That's the Murray River at the height of the drought a few years ago. What did politicians do? They said, oh, we've got to stop that because the bloody thing's drying. They got it wrong. That's after 12 years of drought at Mildura. Have you seen a more pristine river than that? And yet, we got it wrong. I got news for you. The politicians got it wrong. Here are some irrefutable truths of water in Australia. We have an absolute abundance of water in Australia. I haven't put up all the figures because it's a long and late night. We have more water in Australia, whether it's been runoff or total precipitation, than any other country on earth per head of population. So there's no reason for us to be short of water. The next point is that availability of water in Australia is highly variable. It's that variability that demands that we conserve water in times of high flow. The third thing is dams do not destroy rivers. The most pristine aquatic habitat in Australia are the man-made dams and weirs and channels that we've built. Because, you know, I talk to the animals sometimes. I've never spoken to a midge or a yabby or a fish or a duck or a pelican that said, is this a man-made or an actual wetland? But I've talked to a few ducks and they weren't politicians. I talked to a few ducks and they said, you know, mate, we prefer the man-made ones because they're permanent. I can tell you that's absolutely right. we'll go on to the next one. I think I skipped one, didn't I? Yep. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to ditch this plan, and it's time we started saving water like this. I don't know, and I won't go back over it, but anyone who heard me with Alan Jones this morning, I explained in some detail the need for us to start doing this. That's the mighty Clarence River. We don't know how much water's going down that valley because there's no way of measuring it. But because I now know the Clarence very well, I strongly suspect there's something in excess of 500,000 megalitres a day going down that valley. It's all going to sea to waste. That's the Murray River near Echuca in 12, I think it was. My estimation, once again we don't know, is that it was running at about 170 and 180,000 megalitres a day. In other words, sufficient to fill Burrinjuck Dam every 3 or 4 days. When we put dams on rivers and we properly manage that resource, we stop this sort of nonsense. That flood cost the Victorian government $500 million. Everyone in this room knows what happened at Yenda. I'm going to announce a plan on Wednesday that will not only prevent that, it will store that water and we can use it back on the MIA. I just want to stress that Adelaide and South Australia are not short of water. They will never be short of water as long as we control the Murray River properly. The water for Adelaide goes to Port Pirie, Wyangla, all the way up to Woomera. The claim through the drought that they were short of water was always false. The total water consumption in the middle of summer for Adelaide is around about 400 megs a day. Most days where the pumps are, the 6,000 or 7,000 megalitres going past the pumps. So to claim that they're short of water is nonsense. I just want to, because we've got a few politicians sounding off, that white area is and will remain, in my opinion, for probably the next 500 years, the food bowl of Australia. It is a unique food bowl for the simple reason that whole white area is in a Mediterranean climate. A Mediterranean climate is required for most of the bulk food that we grow, wherever we grow it in the world. We grow some food in the tropics, but it's in a Mediterranean climate. The other reason, it's one of the biggest floodplains in the world, and it's millions of years old. Millions of years old. We can increase food production there by over 300%. Just by conserving some more water. The plan to do that we have put to the federal government and the state government last October. It's been conveniently filed in the bottom drawer. We know how to do it, it's been researched, and we will do it. When we do it, we create habitat like that. Does anyone want to argue with me that that's not a pleasant habitat for mankind and critters? That's what we do. This is why I wanted the gentleman at the front to look at this. We all know that the federal government's short of money. We all know that they can't balance the budget. We all know that we're spending more money than we're raising. This is the cost to the government of what's happening with the Murray-Darling Basin plan. Each million megalitres of water that is removed from production, governments lose 5.5 million in high security, 45 million in general security. These figures here is what the community loses. Where this water is taken away, economic activity drops by $2,000 million. These are not my figures. These figures have been confirmed by accountancy firms and by the New South Wales Irrigators Council. we lose 7,600 jobs. We lose 120 million in GST return. Something happened here. We lose another 86 million in, it's not your fault, 86 million. We're only talking 1 million megalitres. The plan envisages removing over 2.5 million megalitres. $250 million has gone out of the pockets of government. Does that make economic sense? We've got to ditch the politics and implement policy. There hasn't been any policy in relation to water come out of either Canberra or Macquarie Street for years. It's been nonsense. Oh, we've got another. I take no responsibility for this. I think I'll sum it up this way. When politicians enacted the Water Act in Canberra, and when it was supported by the people in Macquarie Street, Sydney, what they did, they listened to environmentalists. They were guided by the nonsense in the media, and they totally neglected the people that were going to be affected. Politicians got it wrong. It's only politicians can put it right. But because most politicians are such precious little petals, and they never want to admit they're wrong, and I'm sorry, John, but you're not one of them, okay? It'll probably be a different group of politicians that fix it. And we'll probably start that process next Saturday. Before I explain that, I want you to consider this. And we're talking the Murray River. There is one dam on the Murray itself, and that's Hume Dam. In round figures, it's 3 million megalitres. By Australian standards, it's a fairly big dam. The only other water storage on the Murray River is Lake Victoria, which is an off-river storage, and it's only a puddle, it's 600,000 megs. I want you to consider this. The Kiwar, the Ovens, the King, the Broken, the Goulburn, the Campaspe, the Loddon and the Avon rivers all flow out of the highlands of Victoria, enter the Murray River below Hume Dam. On the northern side, the Billabong Creek, the Lachlan Murrumbidgee and the Darling all flow in below Hume Dam. Where does the flow in the Lower Murray come from? Those rivers, of course. That's where it comes from. Now, according to the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, and according to the Boffins in Canberra, they want over 2.5 million megalitres of water to keep the Lower Murray healthy. It's a nonsense figure, and we've got no idea how they come by it. But let's assume for a moment that it's right. We have very good records at Mannum in South Australia of river flow that have been conveniently removed from the site fairly recently, but you can still get them. Would anyone like to have a stab at, in the last 50 years, how many years more than 2.5 million megs have flowed past Mannum? Would anyone like to have a guess? Yes, Debbie.
Most of them.
Debbie is absolutely correct. You know what the figure is? 42 years out of the last 50, more water has flowed past Mannum than these boffins say they need to keep the river healthy. So if that's a fact, and it is an indisputable fact, why are we withdrawing 2.5 million megalitres from productive use every single year? That is the ultimate condemnation of the Murray-Darling Basin Act, the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, and all of those that brought it into being should hang their heads in shame. You'll be pleased to know I'm nearly finished. Just to make it a little easier for the politicians to swallow the bitter pill of, I got it wrong, we presented the politicians with a plan that will provide all of Australia's water for the next 100 years. We've also provided them with a plan of how it's paid for. We've given them the option to fix it. We now want them to start working on that. Even Henry Lawson, although he wasn't really a bushman or a waterman, because he spent some time at Burke mostly painting the pub and getting on the booze, but he talked to the locals. And in his wonderful poem, The Song of the Darling River, I have watered the barren land 10 leagues wide, but in vain I have tried, in vain I have tried, to show the sign of the great all-giver, the word of a people, O lock your river. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, Senator Madigan, we're here tonight because what's happening is not in the national interest. What's happening is destroying regional communities. What is happening is destroying the environment, as my friend Darren pointed out with the River Red Gums. The people who are enacting this wouldn't know what the environment was if it bit them on the bum. They wouldn't have a clue. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, we're here tonight not to call for change of the Act. We're not here to amend the Act. We're not here to fiddle with the plan. We're here to start a flood of rational condemnation of this whole thing. We are here to throw it out. We're going to kill it. We're going to drown it. Finito.